All right, welcome back. We're going to look at the election of 1828, and we're just going to look at a particular aspect of the election of 1828 and how it contributes to the sense of nationalism across the country. And in a later lecture, we'll be looking at we'll be looking at more detail of the election of 1828 when we look at the two-party system. So the election of 1828 really begins in 1825, and this what happened. Jackson, and this is what we'll talk about more in detail in a later lecture. Is in the election of 1824, Jackson feels like he was robbed of the election, and John Quincy Adams was put into office, despite the fact that he was the president the country wanted. So he wastes no time, Jackson, 1825, to start campaigning on his own behalf. And this marks a revolution in how presidential campaigns will operate to some degree thereafter. Prior to Jackson, prior to the election of 1828 and its campaign proceeding, people would get nominated through various caucuses, and if they were nominated, let's say Jefferson or Adams or Washington or Madison, right, any of these guys that were maybe nominated, they would humbly accept it, right? And they would not really campaign on their own behalf. Other people, surrogates, would campaign for them and support their chosen nominee and denounce maybe other nominees who were also vying. But the actual person would not campaign. It would be a very humble process, right? Jackson is going to change all of that. Rallying around the charge of a corrupt bargain between Adams and Clay, Jackson supporters who had formed the new Democratic Party began to organize on the state and local levels with an eye on reversing the outcome of the election of 1824 originally, right? And later they would give that up and just focus on the election of 1828. Jackson capitalized on the new social and political events by establishing the first political grassroots movement in American history, right? Again, campaigning on his own behalf. By 1827, the first political grassroots movement had established by Jackson when he had a committee functioning in virtually every county and important town or city in the nation. In the election of 1828, saw a birth of a new era of mass democracy. In the election, many Americans were voting for the first time. Even more important, the extension of the right to vote was the increasing interest in the common man and his exercising that right. So, for example, in 1824, you only had 355,000 voters cast their ballots. But in 1828, over 1.1 million people will be casting ballots. So it's more than doubled from one election to the other. As a result, the election of 1828, many of the common people felt that democracy had finally triumphed, as Jackson was represented as the man of the people. Right? Also, as a result of the changes in the electorate, plus the means of communication, education, and the creation of the second two-party system, direct perceptions of the government's roles developed. So as discussed, the new political and economic and social pressures that were building within society culminated in the election of 1828 by leading to a new style and methods of politics. So within this new and different ways, politicians attempted to move the emotion of their audience either by reference to democratic and patriotic symbols by evoking economic and perhaps ethnic groups' interests. Plus, in many states, the older leaders proved incapable either of holding their power or passing it in on attack to younger men. Names like Hancock, Adams, Morris, Randolph, which had been important in both the colonial and revolutionary periods, had lost their political magic. At the same time, this new generation of voters had grown up during the American War of Independence and with its ideologies. Thus, they had a different view of the country than their parents before them. So you have this new generation that didn't grow up in the American Revolution, and so they're going to want different types of candidates because it's a different time, in other words, right? During his John Quincy Adams, during his presidency from 1825 to 1829, like his father, proved to be an unpopular president who was unable to communicate his feelings or goals to the American people. So consequently, Jackson and his Democratic Party won an easy victory in the Electoral College. 178 voting for Jackson, 83 voting for Adams in 1828. The fact that Jackson was both a great hero in many ways and a very ordinary man helps explain his mass appeal, right? So he was seen as a great military hero to many people. He was good at killing and conquering Indians, right? Something that obviously we look back at as a tragedy now, but back in the time, Native Americans were the Al-Qaeda of their time, and so this man knew how to deal with that national issue. And so people looked at him as a hero. Many people did. Not all, but many people did. Jackson typified the myth of the American man and the success story as he rose from a log cabin environment to the White House. So he embodied what is known as meritocracy, right? So he wasn't born at birth and was able to kind of ride that birth. He was born from very modest means and was able to rise to the highest levels of power by his own grit and talent and hard work, as perceived by many people. Jackson was closer to the American people than many of his predecessors because of this modest background. The way Jackson typified the success story was that he was a peculiar blend of both pioneer and aristocrat, right? So he comes from humble means, and but he was able to rise to success. So a lot of people saw that that was a possibility within themselves and wanted to, and thought that that was definitely something quintessential American. Jackson was praised for his frontier origins and the rise to wealth and fame without the benefit of a formal education or association with a political faction. Jackson's image is what was that of a natural aristocrat, one who had achieved success on his own efforts. Thus, people of this new democracy had picked a military hero as its leader. Democracy was walking hand in hand with nationalism, the rise of nationalism with American idealism. Jackson, like his predecessors, Washington, Marshall, Hamilton, and Jefferson, helped create a strong sense of nationalism and pride within this country because of his economic, political, and military accomplishments. So in conclusion, the election of 1828 was the climax of a strong impulse towards democracy that had swept through the American states. Jackson was the first product of this new system to become president within this democratic revolution. All right, that concludes 6.2. We'll look at 6.3 in the next segment. See you then.